You know, the secret to smoky whiskey is actually rotten plants. Would you believe that? It's one of the most intense, love it or hate it flavors in the world, especially the whiskey world. It tastes like it can taste like a cozy campfire, or like a salty seaside pier, a doctor's office. It reminds you of. Some people, it's an aggressive sort of punch to the tongue or the senses, and for others, it's what makes whiskey worth drinking. No question, they absolutely love it. But the secret to all that smoky power isn't some fancy chemicals or a rare, expensive barrel. It's decomposed rotten plants. Wow. Okay, so decomposed rotten plants. Let's pour yourself a dram and let's get into it. Got a few selections of Islay whiskey just sitting here. This particular one is the travel exclusive to travelers. You can only get that. It's a 12-year-old Lafroy. You can get it in airports and duty-free lounges. Lafroy 10 at 40%. Peat Smoke Monster. And 8-year-old Islay single malt Scotch whiskey, Port Asky. That's it. 45.8, so just a little bit stronger. So all of these are in the same Islay style, and even before I can get my nose to that glass, I'm telling you, I can smell it. So the story of peated whiskey, it's not about pristine ingredients, it's about making do. It's all about history and about digging into the ground for fuel. And that's been brewing in the ground for literally thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's a story of how burning ancient soggy vegetation gives us one of the world's most iconic sort of flavors in our booze. So yeah, very, very interesting to say the least. Let's get into the dirty secret behind your favorite smoky whiskey. Oh yes, you can get that peat and smoke up front on the palate. I'm not a huge fan, but I've got to do the research, right? Someone has got to do it. If I don't do it, who else is going to do it, right? That's the question. So before we have the smoke, we need to have something to burn, because it's really, that's obviously called peat, but you hear the whiskey called peaty, and this is where it all starts. So what it is simply peat. You get it when the plants are in the bog and they decompose, they die, and they mold into the ground, and they refuse to rot completely, but they're in there. So picture in the wild, the swampy bogs of Scotland. Do you know the swamp bogs of Scotland cover 20% of the country? 20% of the country, it's absolutely huge. So the vegetation just gets squashed down into dense carbon-rich layers, and basically it's a plant graveyard. So the recipe is simple. Plants plus death and water minus oxygen, all multiplied in a ton of pressure and time. Here you go. There's your peaty, smoky whiskey. But it is an incredibly slow process. It takes just a few inches of peat. A few inches of peat every 1,000 years or whatever. What you're looking at is essentially fossil fuel. It's an awkward teenage phase, a precursor to sunlight from ages ago, for centuries really. And peat was just really fuel, but in remote places like the Scottish Highlands and islands where the trees, they were sort of scarce, but you couldn't build a fire sort of thing without it. People cut it into bricks. I'm sure you've seen scenes of that happening, and used it for the fire. In fact, I remember in my childhood, I do believe that we had what they called, it was very posh at the time, we had peat briquettes. And we used to have an open fire, and we used to burn the peat briquettes on the open fire. Of course, I didn't know at that time what else they could be used for. So, pretty interesting. But how does the peat and the smoke actually, get into the whiskey? Because that's interesting process, isn't it? So what actually happens is they have to trick the barley into thinking it's springtime. and they soak the barley with a little bit of heat, and what happens is they start to sprout, and when they start to sprout, they stop the process, and then they'll dry it. They'll start to light a kiln fire, and on that fire, they're going to put the peaty smoke briquettes, aren't they? So they're going to put the peat onto the fire. That's going to burn the real sort of peat, and that's going to come up through the barley and dry the barley, and in turn that really is infusing everything. It's infusing that barley that in turn is going to be used in the making of the whiskey. So at first, the smoke was just a side effect of the drying. They didn't really realize what was going on until the flavor took on, and the rest really is history. So when we talk about peat's flavor as such, we're really talking about a group of chemical compounds called phenols, and these are molecules that have been released when you burn peat, and it's recognized by our nose, it's recognized by our tongue as smoky, medicinal, or briny. And as the smoke sort of smolders and the barley in the kiln, these phenols grab onto it, and that's sort of the real cool part, is they're actually quite tough. They survive being milled, they survive being mashed and fermented, and even boiled during the distillation, and they still give off the peaty, smoky flavour. So it's very impressive. You'll often hear of the peat heads, I call them smoke heads, peat heads. They talk about parts per million, and that's really the phenols. The number is a concentrate. It's of the phenols in the malted barley. So, lightly peated malts in today's normal market are between 5 and 15 parts per million. Maybe 15 to 30 is a sort of a medium, and then you get it up a little bit into the Ardbegs and some of the heavier brands up around the 50 parts per million. So it's a sliding scale. You can get heavier, peaty, more smoke, and some people, once they get a taste of that, all they want to do is go big. They want more and more and more. And luckily, I'm not that way focused. I'm not into it. I'm not moving over to the dark side yet, but I am moving slightly over to a lighter peated whiskey that I can enjoy without worrying that I'm going to spontaneously combust into a ball of flames. The Brookladdock Experiment Octomore, I think that series, when it was released, it had 300 parts per million. It's massive, and it's an acquired taste. It's not something that you're going to start off your whiskey drinking career by trying the Octomore 8.1 or 8.2, something like that. Think of it like the Scoville rating on a chili pepper. It sort of tells you the heat in the raw ingredients. So the parts per million is a little bit like that. The lighter is light, and the more is much heavier. So interesting. This particular one, I did a review on this, I think just last week. However, it's like it sort of grows on you, because it's like if you were starting a tasting, you're not going, and you've got 5 whiskies, and you've got something from Speyside Highland, you've got something from a lowland, you've got an Irish, and you've got a peat monster. You're going to leave the peat monster to the end. And I know that's not always the case, but you really should, because this does cling on to your palate, and it's going to cling on to your palate for quite a while, because it's the oily, briny sort of sensation and the warming sensation that you'll have on your palate, and that's why most of these whiskies are long finishing. So you can imagine having something like this and then moving to a 40% triple distilled Irish light whiskey. It's going to be like drinking water, because your palate's just not refreshed and adjusted. So if you are at a tasting and you see the peat one at the start, just say to the guys, hey, can we move that to the end? And give them those reasons, because it is going to mess up your palate for the rest of the tasting. Interesting stuff. Let me know what peated whiskey you've got in your collection. Let me know what you think of peated whiskey. I think generally there's not too many. I suppose I'm a fence sitter. I'm in the middle. I've never liked it. And if you think of a scale from here to over here, I've never really liked it. But I'm sort of, I'm wavering. I'm nearly getting there. I haven't moved to the dark side, but I'm starting to enjoy some of my lighter peated whiskies. So let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed listening to that. Do let me know. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Oh, and also look out for the long form review of the Lefroy Travelers exclusive. Until next time, drink responsibly, guys, and sláinte.